Good day, class. Hope you all good. I want to start today's class with a verse from the Bible. It's more blessed to give than to receive. It's more blessed to give than to receive. Taken from Acts chapter 20, verse 35. Now you may think I have nothing to give. I'm just a school-going one. Yes, but I have one good news for you. You can give. Like you can give a small smile or a hug to a person who isn't depressed. You can do some manual but meaningful task to help someone. You can write an encouraging letter to your friend who are all in need. From today onwards, have an attitude that says, who can I going to bless today? Cause our God is a giver. And if you want Him to pour out His blessings and favor in your life, then you must learn to be a giver and not a taker. May God bless you all. Now let's move into the class. I hope everyone knows him. Yes, he is Ratan Tata, one of the few rich men in India. Do you know one thing? He spent a part of his wealth on charity. He has such a nice heart, right? He shared his wealth with needy people. Actually, it's not common nowadays, cause people are more self-pride, jealous and selfish. Among them, there are few good souls or like Tata. I want everyone to possess the heart of helping, cause it will give you a self-peace that no money can give. Okay, for today's class, we're going to see a supplementary called The Envious Neighbor. The Envious Neighbor. It's a Japanese folktale. Japanese folktales are an important cultural aspect of Japan. These folktales are only in oral format and these stories were transferred from generation to generation. These folktales carries moral values to the humanity. In Tamil we call it as Needi Kadaigal. It's similar like that. Now let's move on to the supplementary. In the old days, there lived an honest man with his wife, who had a pet dog, which they used to feed with fish and tidbit from their own kitchen. One day, as the old folks went out to work in their garden, the dog went with them and began playing about. All of a sudden, the dog stopped short and began to bark, "Bow, wow, wow," wagging his tail violently. Let's see the meaning for the hard words. Tidbit, a small piece of tasty food. A small piece of tasty food. Next, wagging, move rapidly to and fro. Move rapidly to and fro. Now you read the paragraph along with me. In the old days, there lived an honest man with his wife, who had a pet dog, which they used to feed with fish and tidbit from their own kitchen. One day, as the old folks went out to work in their garden, the dog went with them and began playing about. All of a sudden, the dog stopped short and began to bark, "Bow, wow, wow," wagging his tail violently. I'll explain. Once there is an old man lived with his wife in a village. They had a pet dog. They used to feed the dog with the leftover things in their kitchen. One day, old man and his wife went to the garden with the dog. Suddenly, the dog stopped in one particular area of the garden and started to bark, "Bow, wow, wow," by wagging his tail to and fro. Now let's see the next paragraph. The old people thought that there must be something nice to eat under the ground. So they brought a spade and began digging. When lo and behold, the place was full of gold pieces and silver and all sort of precious things which had been buried there. So they gathered the treasure and after giving alms to the poor, brought themselves rice field and cornfield and become wealthy people. Now let's see the new phrase in this paragraph. Lo and behold. To look and see something new in a situation or event. Meaning, to look and see something new in a situation or event. Now, you read the paragraph along with me so that you can understand the paragraph by your own. The old people thought that there must be something nice to eat under the ground. So they brought a spade and began digging. When lo and behold, the place was full of gold pieces and silver and all sort of precious things which had been buried there. So they gathered the treasure and after giving alms to the poor, brought themselves rice field and cornfield and become wealthy people. Now I'll explain. Now, these old people thought there is something to eat under the particular ground where the dog is standing and wagging his tail. So they brought the spade and started to dig. Unexpectedly, they saw a small place under the ground. It's a new small place under the ground, which was full of gold, silver and all sort of precious things, which was buried there long before by someone. Now the old man and his wife gathered all the treasures and helped the poor who were all in need and spent the rest of the treasure in buying rice field, cornfield and become wealthy one in that village. Now let's move on to the next paragraph. Now in the neighboring house there dwelt a covetous and stingy old couple who, when they heard what had happened, came and borrowed the dog and having taken him home, prepared a great feast for him and said, "If you please, Mr. Dog, we should be much obliged to you if you would show us a place with plenty of money in it." Now let's see the hard words, meaning for hard words in this paragraph. Covetous, meaning great desire to possess something belonging to someone else. Great desire to possess something belonging to someone else. Obliged, make someone legally. Make someone legally. Now, let's read this paragraph together. Now in the neighboring house there dwelt a covetous and stingy old couple, who, when they heard what had happened, came and borrowed the dog and having taken him home, prepared a great feast for him and said, "If you please, Mr. Dog, we should be much obliged to you if you would show us a place with plenty of money in it." Now I'll explain. Now, somehow this lucky treasure news spread to the neighbor house. There lived a jealousful old couple. They came to the generous old man and borrowed his dog and took the dog to their house and gave a great feast for him and said, "If you show us hidden treasure, we will be more faithful to you." Now let's move on to the next paragraph. The dog, however, who up to that time had received nothing but cuffs and kicks from his host, would not eat any of the dainties which they set before him. So the old people began to get cross and put a rope around the dog's neck, led him out into the garden. But it was all in vain. He let them lead him where they might not a sound would the dog utter. He had no bow-wow for them. At last, however, the dog stopped at a certain spot and began to sniff. So thinking that this might surely be the lucky place, they dug and found nothing but a quantity of dirt and nasty offal, over which they had to hold their nose. Furious at being disappointed, the wicked old couple sneezed the dog and killed him. I'll explain. Here, the dog didn't show any sign regarding treasure. The jealousful old man kicked and beat the dog as per the days goes on. Then slowly the dog stopped eating the nice food which the jealous old man used to serve. One fine evening, the dog stopped in a spot and stared at the place. These cunning old couple thought this is a lucky spot and dig it. But they found only a dirt and waste in that spot. Immediately the cunning old man got anger and killed the dog. Let's move on to the next paragraph. When the good old man saw that the dog, whom he had lent, did not come home, he went next door to ask what had become of him. And the wicked old man answered that he had killed the dog and buried him at the root of a pine tree. So the good old fellow with a heavy heart went to the spot, and having set out a tray with delicious food, he burnt incense and adorned the grave with flowers as he shed tears over his lost pet. I'll explain. Next day, the good old man didn't saw the dog whom he had lent to the jealousful old man. So he went to him and asked for the dog. The jealousful old man furiously said that he killed and buried the dog under a pine tree. The good old man was shocked and went to the spot where the dog was buried and did the rituals by adorning the grave with flowers. Now let's move on to the next paragraph. That night, when the good old man was fast asleep in bed, the dog appeared to him, and after thanking him for all his kindness, said, "Cause the pine tree under which I am buried to be cut down and made into a mortar, and use it, thinking of it as if it were myself." Let's see the meaning for the hard word here. Mortar, meaning a hard substance or crushed to powder. A hard substance or crushed to powder. In Tamil we call it as ural. Now let's read this paragraph again. That night, when the good old man was fast asleep in bed, the dog appeared to him, and after thanking him for all his kindness, said, "Cause the pine tree under which I am buried to be cut down and made into a mortar, and use it, thinking of it as if it were myself." Let's see the meaning. That night, when the good old man was sleeping, the dog appeared in old man's dream and thanked him for all his kindness that the good old man showed towards the dog, and said to the old man, "Use the stem of the pine tree where the dog was buried under, and make a mortar." Mortar means ural, and use it. Now let's move on to the next paragraph. The old man did as the dog had told him to do, and made a mortar out of the wood of the pine tree. But when he ground his rice in it, each grain of the rice turned into some rich treasure. When the wicked old couple saw this, they came to borrow the mortar. But no sooner did they try to use it, all their rice turned into filth. So in a fit of rage, they broken the mortar and burnt it. But the good old man, little suspect that his precious mortar had been broken and burnt, wondered why his neighbor did not bring it back to him. I'll explain. The old man did as the dog had told him to do, and made a mortar out of a pine stem. Then the old man used a mortar to ground his rice in it. Surprisingly, rice turned into rich treasure. This news was somehow spread to the old wicked couple. They came to borrow the mortar and immediately tried to use it with their rice, but it turned into dust. Immediately the wicked old man got anger and broke the mortar and burnt it. Now let's move on to the next paragraph. One night the dog appeared to him again in a dream and told him what had happened, after adding that if he would take the ashes of the burnt mortar and sprinkle them on withered trees, the trees would revive and suddenly put out flowers. After saying this, the dream vanished, and the old man, who heard for the first time of the loss of his mortar, ran out weeping to the neighbor house and begged them at any rate to give him back the ashes of his treasure. Now let's see the meaning for the hard word. Withered, meaning become dry. Meaning become dry. Now let's read this paragraph together. You can understand well. One night the dog appeared to him again in a dream and told him what had happened, after adding that if he would take the ashes of the burnt mortar and sprinkle them on withered trees, the trees would revive and suddenly put out flowers. After saying this, the dream vanished, and the old man, who heard for the first time of the loss of his mortar, ran out weeping to the neighbor house and begged them at any rate to give him back the ashes of his treasure. I'll explain. One night, again the dog appeared before the good old man's dream and said about the thing that happened to the mortar, and also said to the good old man, collect the ashes of the mortar from the wicked old man and sprinkle them on barren trees. The trees would come back to life. After saying this, the dream was vanished. Next morning, the good old man went to the neighbor wicked old man's house and begged for the ashes of mortar. Now let's move on to the next paragraph. Having obtained it, he returned home and made a trial of their virtue upon a withered cherry tree, which upon being touched by the ashes immediately began to sprout and blossom. When he saw this wonderful effect, he put the ashes into a basket and went about the country, announcing himself as an old man who had the power of bringing dead trees to life again. I'll explain. Now, old man brought the ashes to his house. After he reached his home, the good old man sprinkled the ashes on his barren cherry tree which was in his house. Immediately the tree became fruitful. When he saw this wonderful effect, the good old man put the ashes into a basket and kept safely. Somehow this news went all around the country as an old man who has the power to bring dead trees into alive. Now let's move on to the next paragraph. A certain prince, hearing of this and thinking it a mighty strange thing, sent for the old fellow, who showed his power by causing all the withered plum and cherry trees to shoot out and put forth flowers. So the prince gave him a rich reward of piece of silk and cloth and other presents, and sent him home rejoicing. I'll explain. A certain prince from neighbor country heard this and surprised, and sent the old man rich gifts such as silk, clothes, and other presents to the old man's house for a superpower. Now let's move on to the next paragraph. As soon as the neighbor heard of this, they collected all the ashes that remained, and having put them in a basket, the wicked old man went out into the castle town and gave out that he was the old man who had the power of reviving dead trees and causing them to flower. He had not to wait long before he was called into the prince's palace and ordered to exhibit his power. I'll explain. As soon as the neighbor wicked old man heard this, he went to the good old man and collected all the remaining ashes, and went to the prince's palace without his calling. He went there to exhibit the power of ashes. Now let's move on to the next paragraph. But when he climbed up into a withered tree and began to scatter the ashes, not a bud or flower appeared, but the ashes all flew into the prince's eyes and mouth, blinding and choking him. When the prince's retainer saw this, they seized the old man and beat him almost to death, so that he crawled off home in a very sorry plight. When he and his wife found out what a trap they had fallen into, they scolded themselves. I'll explain. When the wicked old man sprinkled the ashes, not a single flower or fruit bloomed. Instead, the ashes went to the prince's eyes and caused him irritation. Immediately, Prince's soldier catched the old man and beat severely. At that evening, the wicked old man reached his house after getting severe beating in king's palace. Then the wicked old man and his wife understood later what a trap they had fallen, and they scolded themselves. Let's move on to the next paragraph. The good old man and women, as soon as they heard of their neighbor's distress, sent for them, and after reproving them for their greedy and cruelty, gave them a share of their own riches, which by repeated strokes of luck had now increased to a goodly sum. So the wicked old people mended their ways and led good and virtuous life ever after. I'll explain. Meanwhile, the good old man heard the distress happen to the wicked old man and his wife. So he went to see him and shared his own riches with the wicked old man and his family. Finally, the wicked old couple mended their ways and lived good and generous life then after. I hope you all enjoy the story. See you all in next class. Until, read the supplementary and try to write your own summary. Be safe and learn happily at home. God bless you. Thank you.